Millionaire offers $5 million to maid's daughter to translate Arabic to shame her. Her words reveal a secret. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type Amen in the comments. And don't forget to share where you're watching from. The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel buzzed with the quiet sophistication that only old money could orchestrate. Crystal champagne flutes caught the light from massive chandeliers, while women in designer gowns glided between marble pillars adorned with fresh white orchids. The annual Wellington Foundation Charity Gala was Manhattan's most exclusive event, where a single table cost more than most people earned in a year. Charles Wellington stood near the mahogany bar, his perfectly tailored Armani tuxedo emphasizing his commanding 6-foot frame. At 38, he possessed the kind of sharp, aristocratic features that graced magazine covers: steel blue eyes, a strong jawline, and prematurely silver hair that only enhanced his distinguished appearance. He'd spent the afternoon researching basic Arabic phrases on Google Translate, preparing what he considered an amusing way to demonstrate the cultural gap between his world and the service staff. "Another spectacular evening, Charles," remarked Senator Patricia Blackwood, approaching with her usual political smile. "The foundation outdid itself this year. 2.7 million raised so far," Charles replied, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "though I suspect we'll surpass 3 million before midnight." As he spoke, his attention was drawn to a figure moving discreetly along the ballroom's periphery. Maria Santos pushed a cleaning cart with quiet efficiency, her simple black uniform a stark contrast to the evening gowns surrounding her. She was perhaps 32, with warm brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Despite her modest attire, there was an unmistakable grace in her movements and an intelligence in her expression that caught Charles off guard. Behind Maria, staying close to the shadows, was a small girl of 6 years old. Isabella Santos had her mother's expressive brown eyes and a cascade of dark curls that seemed to have a mind of their own. She wore a simple blue dress that had been carefully pressed, and she clutched a small notebook against her chest. "Mama," Isabella whispered in accented English, tugging at her mother's uniform. "Why are all these people so dressed up?" "It's a special party, mija," Maria replied softly, continuing to work. "Very important people come here to help others." Charles found himself oddly irritated by the exchange. He had noticed the cleaning woman before. She worked in his office building downtown. But tonight, something about her quiet dignity annoyed him. Perhaps it was the way she moved through his world without seeming impressed by its grandeur. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice cutting through the ambient conversation. Several nearby guests turned to look. "You there, with the cart!" Maria froze, her hands gripping the handle of her cleaning supplies. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting Charles's with a mixture of concern and resignation. "Yes, sir?" Charles approached, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor. The crowd began to take notice, conversations dying as they sensed drama unfolding. "This is a private event," he said, loud enough for surrounding guests to hear. "I don't recall authorizing additional cleaning staff for this evening. Sir, The hotel manager asked me to ensure everything was perfect for your gala," Maria replied, her voice steady despite the obvious discomfort. "I can leave if you prefer." Charles studied her face, noting the way she held herself with dignity despite the awkward situation. It annoyed him further. This woman should be intimidated, apologetic, grateful for the opportunity to be in such company. "Actually," he said, a cruel idea forming in his mind, "since you're here, perhaps you could help with something." He turned to address the growing circle of spectators. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an interesting opportunity for education this evening." Isabella stepped closer to her mother, sensing the shift in atmosphere. The notebook in her hands contained pages of Arabic phrases she had been learning from an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Fadila, who taught languages to immigrant children in their Queens apartment building. "You see," Charles continued, his voice taking on the tone of a master addressing a servant, "I've been studying various languages in my business dealings. Arabic, for instance, is quite fascinating." He pulled out his phone and showed Maria a phrase he had researched earlier on Google Translate. "I wonder if you might ask your daughter to read this aloud. I'm sure our guests would find it educational." The phrase on the screen read, "Ana la afham, ana gabi jidan," which Charles believed meant something harmless about not understanding, based on his superficial online research. Maria glanced at the phone, her face paling slightly, as she recognized the language but not the specific words. "Sir, my daughter is very young." "She doesn't really—" "Nonsense," Charles interrupted, raising his voice so more guests could hear. "I'm sure she's quite bright. In fact, I'll make this interesting." He gestured grandly to the crowd. "If she can translate this simple phrase correctly, I'll donate $500,000 to her education fund right here, tonight, in front of everyone." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even $500,000 was a substantial sum, and Charles's impulsive generosity was both impressive and suspicious to those who knew him well. "Charles," whispered Marcus Reed, his business partner and closest friend, who had just approached from near the Champagne service station. "Are you certain about this? That's quite a commitment." "Pocket change for a good cause," Charles replied with a dismissive wave. Marcus was 42, impeccably dressed but with a nervous energy that had seemed more pronounced lately. "Besides, what are the odds a 6-year-old from Queens can read Arabic?" Isabella looked up at her mother, who gave her an encouraging nod despite her obvious anxiety. The little girl stepped forward, her small voice barely audible in the vast ballroom. "I can try," she said simply. Charles knelt down, positioning himself near a small side table that held microphone equipment for evening announcements. "Take your time, sweetheart." Isabella studied the Arabic text carefully, her finger tracing the unfamiliar script. The ballroom fell silent, except for the soft classical music playing from hidden speakers. Mrs. Fadila had taught her that Arabic was read from right to left, and she had spent hours practicing similar phrases. But as she looked at the words, a chill ran down her spine. These weren't the kind phrases Mrs. Fadila usually taught. Her eyes widened as she recognized what was actually written. "Mama," she whispered in Spanish, then looked up at the expectant crowd. This doesn't say what the man thinks it says. What does it say, darling?" asked an elderly woman in diamonds who had moved closer to hear. Isabella's voice grew stronger, her mother's hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "It says, I don't understand. I am very stupid, but—" She paused, looking around the room with sudden urgency. "That's not the important thing right now." Charles frowned, his confident expression faltering. "What do you mean?" Isabella had been standing near the service entrance when the waiters prepared the champagne service 15 minutes earlier. She had excellent hearing and had noticed 2 men in catering uniforms speaking in hushed Arabic near the kitchen doors. They hadn't noticed the small girl in the shadows, and one phrase had stuck in her mind because it was similar to something Mrs. Fadila had taught her about dangerous situations. The little girl suddenly reached for the microphone on the nearby table, her voice echoing throughout the ballroom. "Please, nobody drink the champagne. Don't drink anything. The drinks are poisoned." The elegant gathering erupted into chaos. Champagne glasses shattered on marble floors as guests dropped them in shock. Women screamed, men shouted questions, and several people immediately began calling 911. Charles stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, but Isabella was already pointing toward the service area. "I heard two men talking in Arabic by the kitchen 15 minutes ago," she said, her small voice somehow cutting through the pandemonium. They weren't real waiters. Their uniforms didn't fit right. They said something about putting the special medicine in all the drinks, and tonight everyone will sleep forever. Mrs. Fadila taught me those words mean poison and death. Maria swept Isabella into her arms, her maternal instincts taking over as security guards began flooding the ballroom. Marcus Reed had gone pale, backing toward the nearest exit while fumbling with his phone. "This is ridiculous," Charles said, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "A child's imagination." His words were cut short as several guests near him who had taken early sips of champagne began clutching their stomachs and looking unwell. The hotel's head of security, James Morrison, was already coordinating with arriving police officers. "Sir," Morrison addressed Charles urgently, "we need to evacuate everyone immediately and secure all beverages for testing. This young lady may have just saved a lot of lives." The next morning, the Metropolitan Hotel had been transformed into the center of the largest domestic terrorism investigation in New York City's recent history. The FBI had taken over the case from local police, and preliminary tests confirmed the little girl's shocking revelation. The champagne had indeed been laced with ricin, a deadly poison that would have killed everyone who consumed it within 6 to 12 hours. Special Agent Diana Reeves, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with 20 years of counter-terrorism experience, sat across from Charles Wellington in the hotel's private conference room. The usually immaculate billionaire looked haggard after a sleepless night of questioning and the weight of nearly losing 300 people, including himself. "Mr. Wellington, let's go through the timeline once more," Agent Reeves said, her voice professional but kind. The champagne service began at 9:15 p.m. Isabella Santos issued her warning at 9:23 p.m. That 8-minute window likely prevented the largest mass poisoning in U.S. history. Charles ran a hand through his silver hair, his usual composure completely shattered. "Agent Reeves, I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't put that little girl in such an uncomfortable position. The irony is devastating. Mr. Wellington, we need to focus on who would want to target your specific event. This wasn't random. Someone with detailed knowledge of your gala's operations orchestrated this attack." Down the hall, in a smaller conference room designed to be child-friendly, Isabella sat with her mother and FBI child specialist, Dr. Sarah Chen. The 6-year-old was drawing pictures while recounting exactly what she had heard and seen, her remarkable memory providing crucial details. "The two men were by the big silver doors where the waiters come out," Isabella explained, adding details to her drawing. "They spoke Arabic, but not like Mrs. Fadila. Their words were angry, and they kept looking at their watches." Dr. Chen, who spoke fluent Arabic, was impressed by Isabella's accurate pronunciation of the phrases she had overheard. "Isabella, you said their uniforms didn't fit right. Can you tell me more about that?" "The pants were too short on one man, and the other one's jacket was too big. Real waiters always look neat and perfect at fancy parties." Maria watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. The past 18 hours had been overwhelming, with FBI agents, reporters trying to contact them, and the realization that her child had prevented a catastrophe beyond imagination. Agent Reeves returned to speak with them after completing Charles's interview. "Mrs. Santos, Isabella, thanks to your daughter's exceptional observation skills, we've identified the two men from the hotel's security footage. They're professionals who specialize in untraceable poisonings, and they're wanted in connection with similar attacks in Europe." "Have you arrested them?" Maria asked. "We're tracking them now. They disappeared after Isabella's warning, but we have leads on their location. More importantly, we're investigating who hired them." 2 days later, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Agent Reeves stood in Charles Wellington's office with Detective Raymond Carter from NYPD, both wearing grim expressions. "Charles, we've traced the payment to the assassins," Agent Reeves began. "It went through 3 shell companies, but we followed the money trail. The final payment originated from an account controlled by someone with access to Wellington Corporation funds." Charles felt the world tilt around him. "That's impossible. Only Marcus and I have access to those accounts." Detective Carter pulled out a folder thick with financial documents. "We've been analyzing your company's financial records for the past 72 hours. There are discrepancies going back 3 years. Money moved in small amounts that would be difficult to detect without a comprehensive audit." "What are you saying?" "We're saying that someone has been embezzling from Wellington Corporation for years," Agent Reeves continued. "And when they learned about your planned merger with Blackstone Industries, they realized the detailed financial scrutiny would expose their theft." Charles sank into his chair, the betrayal hitting him like a physical blow. "How much money are we talking about?" "Approximately $12 million over 3 years, Detective Carter replied. "The merger would have required full disclosure of all financial activities. The embezzler was facing certain discovery and criminal prosecution." "Marcus," Charles whispered, "but why poison 300 innocent people?" Agent Reeves explained the cold logic. "The attack was designed to look like terrorist action against wealthy Americans. Your death would have halted the merger indefinitely, and in the chaos following a mass casualty event, financial irregularities would have been overlooked for months, possibly years." The arrest came 72 hours after the investigation began. Marcus Reed was taken into custody at his Hamptons estate as he attempted to board a private jet to the Cayman Islands. When FBI agents searched his luggage, they found falsified documents, offshore banking information, and encrypted communications with the hired assassins. Charles stood in his office that evening, staring out at the Manhattan skyline he had once thought represented the pinnacle of success. The man he had trusted for 15 years, his closest friend and business partner, had been willing to murder hundreds of innocent people to cover up his crimes. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Patterson, his assistant, appeared in the doorway with an unusual expression of warmth on her typically professional face. "Mr. Wellington, there's a Maria Santos here to see you. She has her daughter with her." Charles's heart rate increased unexpectedly. He hadn't seen Maria and Isabella since the initial FBI interviews. "Send them in, please." Maria entered, wearing a simple but elegant navy dress, her composed demeanor intact despite the media circus that had surrounded their family for the past 3 days. Isabella walked beside her, wearing a bright yellow dress and carrying the same notebook Charles remembered from the gala. "Mr. Wellington," Maria said formally, "I hope we're not interrupting anything important." "Nothing could be more important than seeing you both," Charles replied, then caught himself at how eager his voice sounded. "Please, sit down. How are you handling everything? The media attention must be overwhelming." "But we're managing," Maria replied carefully, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Isabella wanted to see how you were doing. She's been worried about you since Agent Reeves told us about your friend." Isabella looked up at Charles with serious 6-year-old eyes. "Are you very sad that your friend tried to hurt people?" The directness of the question caught Charles off guard. "Yes, Isabella, I'm very sad and very confused. I thought I knew Marcus, but I was wrong about him. Mrs. Fadila says that sometimes people we love make very bad choices, and it's okay to be sad about that," Isabella replied with the wisdom that continued to amaze him. "Your Mrs. Fadila sounds like a very wise woman," Charles said softly. "She is. She wants to meet you sometime, to thank you for being kind to us after the scary night." Maria shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Wellington, Charles, I came here for 2 reasons. First, to thank you again. If you hadn't created that situation with the Arabic phrase, Isabella would never have been near the microphone when she needed it." Charles shook his head. Maria, I created that situation to humiliate you and Isabella. I don't deserve thanks for my cruelty leading accidentally to something good. Maybe not, Maria replied with quiet dignity. But Mrs. Fadila says that God sometimes works through our mistakes to create something beautiful. The important thing is what we choose to do next. What was the second reason you came? Charles asked. Maria hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. The scholarship you offered, we've been thinking about it. $500,000 is an extraordinary gift, but I need to be sure you understand that accepting it doesn't mean we owe you anything beyond gratitude. Of course not, Charles said quickly. Maria, that offer stands regardless of anything else. Isabella saved my life and the lives of hundreds of others. It's the least I can do. Isabella had been quietly observing the adults' conversation. Mama, can I ask Mr. Wellington something? Of course, Mija. Mr. Wellington, are you lonely now that your friend is gone? The child's innocent question hit Charles harder than any business rival's criticism ever had. Yes, Isabella, I am very lonely. Would you like to have dinner with us sometime? Mama makes really good soup, and Mrs. Fadila comes over to teach me Arabic on Wednesdays. Charles looked at Maria, seeing surprise and caution in her expression. Isabella, that's very sweet, but I would love that, Charles interrupted gently, but only if your mama thinks it's a good idea. I know I haven't given her many reasons to trust me. Maria studied his face for a long moment. One dinner, she said finally. Wednesday evening, if you're interested in meeting Mrs. Fadila and seeing how normal people live. Nothing would make me happier, Charles replied honestly. As they prepared to leave, Isabella approached his desk with her characteristic directness. Mr. Wellington, Mrs. Fadila says that when bad things happen, they sometimes make space for good things to grow. Maybe losing your old friend means you can make new, better friends. Charles knelt down to Isabella's level. You know what, Isabella? I think Mrs. Fadila might be absolutely right. 3 days later, Charles Wellington stood outside a modest apartment building in Queens, holding a bouquet of flowers and feeling more nervous than he had before any corporate presentation. The building was clean but clearly aging, with small balconies decorated with potted plants and children's bicycles. This was a world entirely foreign to his Manhattan penthouse experience. Isabella's excited voice echoed down the stairwell as he climbed to the 3rd floor. Mama, Mrs. Fadila, he's here. The door opened to reveal Maria, wearing a simple green dress and an apron, her hair gathered in a ponytail. Behind her stood a slight elderly woman with silver hair covered by a beautiful blue and gold scarf. This had to be the famous Mrs. Fadila. Mr. Wellington, Maria said with formal politeness, please come in. The apartment was small, but immaculately maintained, with family photos on every surface and the warm aroma of home-cooked food filling the air. Charles realized he hadn't smelled anything like it since his childhood visits to his grandmother's house, decades ago. Charles! Isabella ran to him with unreserved joy. These are for you. She handed him a drawing of the 3 of them standing together under a rainbow. This is beautiful, Isabella. Thank you. Mrs. Fadila approached with the measured grace of someone accustomed to greeting strangers with warmth. Mr. Wellington, I am Fadila Nassar. Isabella has told me so much about you. Mrs. Nassar, Isabella has told me wonderful things about you as well. Thank you for teaching her the language skills that saved so many lives. Please, call me Mrs. Fadila, as the children do, and you should know, Isabella's courage came from her own heart, not from my lessons. As they settled around the small dining table, Charles found himself in the unfamiliar but pleasant situation of being a guest rather than a host. Maria served lamb stew with vegetables, homemade bread, and tea in delicate glasses that Mrs. Fadila had brought from her own apartment. "This is delicious," Charles said, genuinely impressed. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal in, well, years, actually." "You cook for yourself?" Mrs. Fadila asked, with the curiosity of someone trying to understand a foreign concept. "I have a chef who prepares meals, or I eat at restaurants," Charles admitted. Realizing how hollow it sounded, Isabella looked up from her dinner with wide eyes. "You have someone who cooks for you every day? Like a helper?" "Something like that. But don't you want to cook your own food sometimes? Mama lets me help make cookies." Charles found himself charmed by Isabella's innocent questions about his lifestyle. "I never learned how to cook. My parents had staff for that when I was growing up." "Mrs. Fadila can teach you," Isabella announced. "She taught Mama how to make the best soup in the world." "Isabella," Maria said with gentle warning, "not everyone wants to learn to cook." "Actually," Charles said, surprising himself, "I think I'd like that very much." Mrs. Fadila smiled. "Cooking is like learning language. It connects us to our families and our history. I would be honored to teach you." As the evening progressed, Charles found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Mrs. Fadila shared stories of her childhood in Lebanon. Isabella showed him her Arabic homework, and Maria gradually became less formal in her interactions with him. "Mrs. Fadila," Charles said during a pause in conversation, "Isabella mentioned that you wanted to thank me for something." The elderly woman's expression grew serious. "Mr. Wellington, you gave my dear Isabella a chance to save lives, but more than that, you showed her that even adults can learn from their mistakes. This is a valuable lesson." "I'm not sure I understand." "In my country we have a saying, 'The tree that bends in the storm survives, while the rigid tree breaks.' You could have remained rigid in your pride after that night. Instead, you bent, you acknowledged your mistake, and showed respect to Maria and Isabella. This teaches children that adults can change and grow." Charles felt the truth of her words deeply. "Mrs. Fadila, I was cruel and arrogant that night. I'm still learning how to be a better person." "Good," she replied with a warm smile. "The day we stop learning is the day we stop living." Isabella, who had been following the conversation with typical 6-year-old intensity, suddenly spoke up. "Charles, do you want to see my room? I have pictures of Lebanon that Mrs. Fadila gave me." "Isabella," Maria interjected, "Charles might want to go home soon." "Actually, I'd love to see your room," Charles said, genuinely interested. Isabella's room was tiny but filled with personality, books stacked on shelves, drawings taped to walls, and a collection of dolls from various countries that Mrs. Fadila had given her. What struck Charles most was how happy the space felt, despite its modest size. "This is where I practice reading Arabic," Isabella said, pointing to a small desk by the window. "And this is my treasure box, where I keep special things." She opened a small wooden box and showed him various items: a seashell from a rare trip to the beach, a photo of her and Maria, a bracelet Mrs. Fadila had made her. "These are wonderful treasures," Charles said, sitting on the edge of her small bed. "Charles, can I ask you something important?" "Of course." "Do you have treasures? Like things that make you happy when you look at them?" The question caught Charles completely off guard. He thought about his penthouse, filled with expensive art and furniture, but realized that none of it made him happy the way Isabella's simple treasures clearly made her happy. "You know what, Isabella? I don't think I do. But meeting you and your mama has made me realize that I'd like to start collecting some real treasures." "Like what?" "Like pictures of friends and memories of good times, and maybe some drawings from a very talented artist I know." Isabella beamed. "I can make you lots of drawings." Indeed, when they returned to the living room, Maria was helping Mrs. Fadila clear the dishes. Charles automatically moved to help, but both women looked surprised. "Guests don't usually—" Maria began. "I want to help," Charles said simply. "Please." And as they worked together in the small kitchen, Charles found himself thinking about the contrast between this evening and his usual social interactions. There were no business deals being discussed, no networking opportunities, no financial advantages to be gained. Just three people sharing a meal and getting to know each other. "Maria," he said quietly as they dried dishes, "thank you for this. I know you had every reason to refuse my request for dinner." "Why did you want to come here, Charles?" "Really?" He considered his answer carefully. "Because for the first time in my adult life, I met people who showed me what real goodness looks like. I've spent years surrounded by wealth and power, but I've been starving for authenticity. You and Isabella and Mrs. Fadila, you're genuine in a way I forgot existed." Maria studied his face. "That's a nice sentiment, but Charles, our worlds are very different. You'll go back to your Manhattan life and we'll stay here in Queens." What if I don't want my Manhattan life to stay the same?" he asked quietly. Before Maria could respond, Isabella appeared with Mrs. Fadila behind her. "Charles," Isabella announced, "Mrs. Fadila says you should come back next Wednesday for another Arabic lesson and more soup." "I would love that," Charles replied, looking at Maria for permission. "1 week at a time," Maria said cautiously, but her expression was softer than it had been at the beginning of the evening. As Charles prepared to leave, Mrs. Fadila pulled him aside. "Mr. Wellington, may I give you some advice?" "Please." "Maria has been hurt before by people who made promises they didn't keep. She is protecting not just herself, but Isabella. If you truly care about them, prove it with consistency, not grand gestures. Show up when you say you will. Be patient. Earn their trust slowly." "Thank you, Mrs. Fadila. That's exactly what I needed to hear." As Charles rode back to Manhattan in his car, he found himself thinking about Isabella's question about treasures. For the first time in years, he felt like he was beginning to understand what real wealth might look like. It wasn't in his bank account or his stock portfolio. It was in the warmth of that small apartment, the wisdom of an elderly Lebanese woman, and the possibility of earning the trust of two remarkable people who had already changed his life forever. The next morning, he would begin the process of fundamentally changing how he lived, worked, and thought about success. But tonight, he simply sat in his empty penthouse, holding Isabella's drawing and planning next Wednesday's visit with an anticipation he hadn't felt since childhood. 8 weeks later, and Charles Wellington found himself in what had become his favorite place in the world, Maria's modest kitchen, learning to make Lebanese rice from Mrs. Fadila, while Isabella practiced Arabic at the small table nearby. The transformation in his life had been gradual but profound. "No, no, Mr. Charles, Mrs." Fadila said with patient amusement, watching him stir the rice. "You must be gentle. The rice is like trust. If you rush it, it breaks." "I'm trying," Charles replied, his expensive business shirt sleeves rolled up and a small smile playing at his lips. "But I think I was born to order food, not cook it." Isabella looked up from her homework with a grin. "Daddy Charles is getting better, though. Last week, he only burned the bread a little bit." The casual use of Daddy Charles never failed to make Charles's heart skip a beat. Isabella had begun using the term about 3 weeks ago, and neither he nor Maria had corrected her, though they hadn't discussed what it meant either. Maria emerged from the living room where she had been folding laundry, a domestic task that Charles had offered to help with, much to her amusement. Over the past 2 months, she had watched Charles attempt to integrate into their world with a mixture of skepticism and growing admiration. "How's our chef doing?" she asked, noting the rice that was only slightly overdone. "Getting there," Charles replied. "Mrs. Fadila is very patient with hopeless students." "Not hopeless," the elderly woman corrected, "simply learning a new language. Cooking is communication between the heart and the hands." The past 8 weeks had established a comfortable routine. Charles came for dinner every Wednesday, and gradually other visits had been added. Saturday morning breakfast, Sunday walks in the park, and even a few grocery shopping trips that had resulted in Charles discovering the difference between fresh vegetables and the prepared meals he was accustomed to. "Charles," Maria said as they sat down to eat, "I need to tell you something. The reporters called again today." Charles's expression grew serious. The media attention surrounding Isabella's heroism had died down somewhat, but there was still occasional interest in their story, especially regarding Charles's friendship with the family that had saved his life. What did they want this time? "They're asking about us, about our relationship. Someone saw you at the grocery store with Isabella last weekend." Charles felt a familiar tension. He had been careful to keep his growing feelings for Maria private, unsure of how she felt and unwilling to pressure her. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on shared dinners, long conversations, and Isabella's unwavering affection for him. "What did you tell them?" "The truth, that you're a friend who's been very kind to us." Isabella, who had been listening with the keen attention children gave to adult conversations that mentioned them, spoke up. "But Charles, you're more than a friend, aren't you? Friends don't come to dinner every week and learn to cook and help with groceries." Both adults looked at the 6-year-old in surprise. Her observation was accurate, but neither had been ready to define what they were becoming. "Isabella's right," Charles said quietly. "I am more than a friend, at least I hope I am, but it's up to your mama to decide what she's comfortable with." Maria felt her cheeks flush. Over the past 2 months, she had watched Charles transform from the arrogant billionaire who had tried to humiliate her into someone genuine and caring. He was learning Spanish to communicate better with Isabella, had established the education fund without any fanfare, and had shown up consistently every week, just as Mrs. Fadila had advised. "Charles," she said carefully, "I need you to understand something. I've been on my own with Isabella for 4 years. I've built our life to be stable and safe. I can't let someone into that life unless I'm sure they're going to stay." "What would make you sure?" he asked. "Time," she replied honestly, "and seeing how you handle things when they're difficult, not just when everything is good." Mrs. Fadila, who had been quietly observing the exchange, cleared her throat. "If I may," she said, "there is something you should all know. Mr. Charles, you have been coming here for 8 weeks. In that time, you have learned to cook, helped with shopping, played with Isabella, and shown respect for our family. But Maria is right to be cautious." "Oh, what do you mean?" Charles asked. "Love that grows slowly is like a strong foundation. It can support great weight. Love that grows quickly is like a house built on sand. The first storm may wash it away." The next day, Marcus Reed's trial had been scheduled to begin in September, but there had been a development. "Charles, I need to inform you about Marcus Reed's situation," Agent Reeves said, her voice carrying an unusual heaviness. "Early this morning, he was found dead in his cell at the Federal Detention Center." Charles felt the world shift slightly. "What? How?" "Millionaire, he had been on suicide watch since his arrest, but he managed to fashion a noose from his bedsheets during the brief window when guards changed shifts. He left a detailed confession, including a letter specifically addressed to you. The letter arrived by FBI courier that afternoon." Charles sat alone in his office, reading Marcus's final words. "Charles, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I can't live with what I tried to do, and I can't face spending the rest of my life in prison for attempting to murder you and 299 innocent people." The money started small. Just temporary loans from company accounts that I planned to pay back, but gambling debts grew, and then there were the investments that failed, and suddenly I was in too deep. When I learned about the Blackstone merger, I knew the full audit would expose everything. I convinced myself that if you died in what looked like a terrorist attack, the merger would be cancelled, and no one would ever discover the missing money. I told myself it was just you I was targeting, that the others were unfortunate collateral damage. I was wrong about everything. I was wrong to steal from you. I was wrong to think murder was a solution. And I was wrong to risk innocent lives for my own cowardice. That little girl who saved everyone is a better person than I ever was. Take care of her and her mother. They gave you something I never could, a chance to be truly good. I'm sorry for everything. Marcus Charles sat staring at the letter for a long time, processing 15 years of friendship that had ended in betrayal and death. When he finally called Maria to share the news, her response surprised him. "Are you okay?" she asked immediately. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm sad, but I'm also relieved that he won't be able to hurt anyone else. Do you want to come over tonight? Mrs. Fadila is making stuffed grape leaves, and Isabella has been practicing a song in Arabic to show you." "You don't have to take care of me, Maria." "I know I don't have to," she replied softly. "I want to." 3 weeks later, Charles found himself in a situation he hadn't anticipated. Isabella had come down with a stomach bug, and Maria had asked him to come over to help while she dealt with a cranky, feverish 6-year-old. "She's asking for you," Maria said when he arrived, looking exhausted. "She's been throwing up since this morning, and she keeps saying she wants Daddy Charles to read to her." Charles felt his heart tighten. He had never dealt with a sick child before, but Isabella's request moved him deeply. He found her curled up in her small bed, looking pale and miserable. "Hey, sweetheart," he said gently, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I heard you're not feeling well." "Daddy Charles," she said weakly, "will you stay with me? My tummy hurts really bad." "Of course I'll stay," he said, stroking her forehead. "What would make you feel better? Will you read me the story about the Lebanese princess that Mrs. Fadila gave me?" For the next 2 hours, Charles sat beside Isabella's bed, reading stories, bringing her small sips of water, and holding her hand when waves of nausea hit. When she finally fell asleep, he found Maria in the kitchen, cleaning up from the day. "How is she?" Maria asked. "Finally sleeping. I think the fever's breaking." Maria looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen before, something softer and more open than her usual careful warmth. "Charles, thank you for coming. You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did," he interrupted gently. "Maria, I love that little girl, like she's my own daughter. When she's sick, when she needs something, when she's happy or sad, I want to be here for all of it." Maria was quiet for a long moment. "And what about me, Charles? How do you feel about me?" The directness of her question caught him off guard, but he answered honestly. "I'm in love with you, Maria. I have been for weeks. I love your strength, your grace, the way you've raised Isabella. I love watching you with her, and I love the way you've made me want to be a better person." Tears gathered in Maria's eyes. "Charles, I know our worlds are different. I know you have every reason to be cautious. But I also know that what I feel for you isn't fascination or charity or guilt. It's love, real, lasting love." "I'm scared," Maria admitted. "I've been hurt before, and I can't risk Isabella getting hurt. She already loves me, and I already love her," Charles pointed out. "Maria, I can't promise that loving me will be easy, but I can promise that I'm not going anywhere, not tonight, not next week, not ever." Before Maria could respond, Isabella's voice called out weakly from her room. "Mama, Daddy Charles, I don't feel good again." They hurried to her room together, and as Charles held the basin while Maria stroked Isabella's hair, Maria realized something profound. This was what family looked like. Not perfect moments or grand gestures, but showing up when things were difficult and messy and real. The following week, during their regular Wednesday dinner, Mrs. Fadila made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I have been thinking," she said as they cleared the dishes, about families and how they grow. Isabella perked up with interest. What do you mean, Mrs. Fadila? I mean that sometimes families are born all at once, and sometimes they grow slowly, like a garden. Mr. Charles has been part of our garden for 3 months now. Charles and Maria exchanged glances, unsure where this was leading. Mrs. Fadila, Maria said carefully, what are you trying to say? I am saying that love requires courage. Charles has shown courage by learning to be part of your family. You have shown courage by allowing him into your life, but courage also means speaking truth when it is time. Isabella, with the clarity that children often possessed, suddenly spoke up. Mrs. Fadila means that Mama and Daddy Charles should get married. Both adults stared at the 6-year-old, then at each other. Isabella, Maria began, it's not that simple. Why not? Isabella asked with perfect 6-year-old logic. You love each other, and we're already like a family. Mrs. Fadila says that when people love each other and want to stay together forever, they get married. Charles knelt down to Isabella's level. Sweetheart, marriage is a very big decision. It's not just about love. It's about promising to take care of each other for the rest of our lives. Don't you want to take care of us forever? Isabella asked with concern. More than anything, Charles replied immediately, but I need to know that your mama wants that too. All eyes turned to Maria, who felt the weight of the moment. Over the past 3 months, she had watched Charles prove himself again and again. He had been patient when she was cautious, consistent when she tested him, and genuinely caring when Isabella was sick. Charles, she said quietly, ask me again in 3 months. If you still feel the same way, and if you've truly thought about what it means to be Isabella's father legally and permanently, then yes. I think my answer would be yes. Charles felt his heart soar. Really, really. But Charles, I need you to understand, if we do this, there's no going back. Isabella will call you Daddy, and you'll be her father in every way that matters. Are you ready for that responsibility? I've been ready since the first night I met her, Charles replied, without hesitation. Isabella cheered and threw her arms around both of them. We're going to be a real family. Mrs. Fadila wiped away tears with her apron. Alhamdulillah, she whispered. Praise be to God. 3 months later, he stood in Maria's apartment, wearing jeans and a sweater, helping Isabella wrap Christmas presents, while Maria and Mrs. Fadila prepared traditional Lebanese holiday cookies in the kitchen. The sight would have been unrecognizable to anyone who had known him a year ago. Daddy Charles, are you nervous about asking Mama to marry you? Isabella whispered conspiratorially as she carefully folded wrapping paper around a gift for her mother. A little bit, Charles admitted. Are you nervous about me becoming your real daddy officially? No, Isabella replied with certainty. You already are my real daddy. We just need to make it official so everyone knows. The ring had been chosen with Isabella's help, a simple, elegant diamond solitaire that Maria could wear while working without it being ostentatious. Charles had learned that Maria's tastes ran toward authentic rather than expensive, and he wanted the engagement ring to reflect who she actually was, not who the world might expect a billionaire's fiancé to be. Remember, Isabella said seriously, you have to get on one knee, and you have to tell her all the reasons you love her, and then you have to promise to love me forever too. I think I can handle that, Charles replied with a smile. Mrs. Fadila appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her apron. Mr. Charles, may I speak with you privately? They stepped onto the small balcony while Isabella continued her wrapping project. Are you certain about this path you are choosing? Mrs. Fadila asked directly. More certain than I've ever been about anything, Charles replied. Marriage to Maria means more than romance, the elderly woman continued. It means becoming father to Isabella, not just in your heart, but in the eyes of the law. It means that her needs come before your comfort, her happiness before your convenience. I understand that. Do you? When Isabella has nightmares, you will be the one she calls for. When she needs help with homework, you will sit at that small table for hours if necessary. When she becomes a teenager and tests your patience, you will need to love her through it all. Charles considered her words carefully. Mrs. Fadila, for 38 years, I thought success meant acquiring things, money, property, influence. But Isabella and Maria have taught me that real success means being needed and trusted by people you love. I want those responsibilities. I want to be the person Isabella calls when she's scared and the person Maria turns to when she needs support. Mrs. Fadila smiled. Then you have my blessing and my prayers for your happiness. That evening, at the spot where they had started taking regular walks together, Charles had arranged for Mrs. Fadila to take Isabella to the playground nearby, while he and Maria sat on their favorite bench overlooking the river. "Maria," he began, his voice slightly nervous despite months of preparation, "6 months ago, you asked me to wait 3 months before proposing. Then you asked me to wait another 3 months to be sure." "I remember," Maria replied, noting the unusual tension in his voice. "I've waited because I wanted to prove to you that this isn't temporary or impulsive. I wanted to show you that I could be consistent, that I could learn to be part of your family, that I could be someone you and Isabella could depend on. Charles, you've proven all of that and more. Have I proven that I love you? Not just the idea of you, but really you, your strength, your wisdom, the way you make every day better just by being in it." "Yes," she whispered. Charles slid off the bench onto one knee, pulling out the ring box. "Maria Santos, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you and Isabella? Will you make me the luckiest man alive?" "Yes," Maria said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Charles, I'll marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Isabella came running from the playground with Mrs. Fadila behind her. "Did she say yes? Are we engaged?" Isabella shouted. "We're engaged!" Charles confirmed, lifting Isabella into his arms as she cheered. Mrs. Fadila embraced them all, her eyes bright with happy tears. "Mabruk, my dear ones. Congratulations." 2 days after the engagement, Charles sat in his lawyer's office discussing the legal aspects of marrying Maria and adopting Isabella. David Morrison, Charles's attorney for the past decade, had been surprised by the speed of his client's life changes, but was working diligently to ensure everything was handled properly. "Charles, the adoption process will take approximately 6 months after the wedding," Morrison explained. "Isabella will need to consent, which won't be a problem given her obvious affection for you, and there will be background checks, home studies, and court appearances." "Whatever it takes," Charles replied. "I want everything to be official and legal." "Have you discussed changing Isabella's last name?" "She wants to be Isabella Wellington Santos, keeping both her mother's name and mine. I think that's perfect." Morrison smiled. "It's unusual to see you this happy, Charles. Marriage and fatherhood suit you." 2 months later, the wedding planning was in full swing. Maria had initially been overwhelmed by Charles's desire to make everything perfect, but they had found a compromise that reflected both their personalities. Elegant but not ostentatious, meaningful rather than merely expensive. "The caterer wants to know about dietary restrictions for the guests," Maria said, reviewing the ever-growing list of details. "Mrs. Fadila has given them a list of traditional Lebanese dishes she'd like included," Charles replied. "And Detective Carter specifically requested that there be good mac and cheese for Isabella." They were planning the wedding for late spring, giving them time to complete all the legal preparations and allowing Charles to gradually introduce Maria and Isabella to his professional world. The media attention had been significant but manageable, with most coverage focusing on the positive aspects of their unusual love story. "Charles," Maria said as they went over seating charts. "Are you sure your business associates will be comfortable with such a mix of people?" "If they're not really my friends," Charles replied simply. "Mrs. Fadila, Detective Carter, Dr. Walsh, Isabella's teacher, these are the people who matter to us now." Isabella looked up from her homework. "Will there be dancing at the wedding?" "Absolutely," Charles said. "Mrs. Fadila is going to teach everyone some Lebanese folk dances." "And will I really be your daughter after the wedding?" "Well, we'll be family after the wedding," Charles explained. "But the official adoption will take a few more months after that. There are legal steps we have to follow." "But you'll still be my daddy during those months, right?" "Forever and always, sweetheart." 3 weeks before the wedding, Charles received unexpected news that tested the foundation they had built. Agent Reeves called with information about the investigation's final resolution. "Charles, we've recovered most of the money Marcus embezzled, plus assets from his estate. The total comes to about $15 million. Since these were technically corporate funds, they belong to Wellington Corporation, but I wanted you to know." Charles discussed the news with Maria that evening as they walked through their neighborhood in Queens, a routine that had become precious to him. "What will you do with the money?" Maria asked. "I was thinking about expanding the scholarship fund," Charles replied. "Make it large enough to help hundreds of children like Isabella." "That sounds perfect. Maria, can I ask you something that's been on my mind?" "Of course. Do you ever worry that I'm too different from your world? That I'll never really understand what it's like to struggle financially or worry about basic security?" Maria stopped walking and took his hands. "Charles, I don't need you to have lived my experiences. I need you to respect them and learn from them. You've done that. You've changed, not because you wanted to be a different person, but because you wanted to be worthy of us." "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too. And Charles, you are worthy of us. You've proven that every day for 8 months." The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, with the kind of spring sunlight that made Central Park's flowering trees seem to glow from within. Charles stood in the bridal suite of the Plaza Hotel, adjusting his tie for the 5th time and feeling more nervous than he had before any business deal in his career. "Charles, you need to relax," said Detective Carter, who was serving as his best man. "You look like you're about to faint." "Can't believe this is actually happening," Charles replied, looking out the window toward the park, where the ceremony would take place in 3 hours. "Cold feet?" asked Dr. Walsh, who had arrived to check on both the bride and groom before the ceremony. "Not cold feet," Charles clarified, "just awe, I suppose. 11 months ago, I was a lonely, arrogant man who thought money could buy anything. Today, I'm marrying the love of my life and becoming father to the most amazing little girl in the world." Dr. Walsh smiled. "It's quite a transformation. How do you feel about the responsibility of instant fatherhood?" "Terrified and thrilled in equal measure," Charles admitted, "but I've had 8 months to practice, and Isabella has been very patient with my learning curve." Meanwhile, in another suite, Maria was having her own pre-wedding jitters. Mrs. Fadila was helping her with the final touches on her wedding dress, a simple but elegant ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves that Charles had surprised her by having custom made by a Lebanese designer. "Mama, you look like a princess," Isabella said, twirling in her flower girl dress, a pale pink creation that made her look like something out of a fairy tale. "Thank you, Mija. Are you ready to be part of a new family officially?" "I've been ready forever," Isabella replied with 6-year-old certainty. "Daddy Charles has been my real daddy for months already." Mrs. Fadila finished adjusting Maria's veil with tears in her eyes. "In my country, we say that Allah writes our stories in ways we cannot understand until the end." Charles thought he was humiliating a poor woman and her child, but Allah was writing a love story. Later that afternoon, beneath the same oak tree where Charles had proposed, 200 guests had gathered, an eclectic mix of Manhattan elite, Queen's neighbors, law enforcement friends, and the extended family they had created over the past year. Charles stood at the altar with Detective Carter beside him, watching as the string quartet began playing and Isabella appeared at the beginning of the white carpet runner. She wore her pink dress, with flowers in her dark curls, and carried a basket of rose petals with the serious concentration of someone performing the most important job of her life. As she walked slowly toward the altar, scattering petals with precise movements, Charles felt his heart swell with pride and love. When she reached him, she whispered, "Daddy, you look very handsome. Mama is going to be so happy." "I already am happy, sweetheart," Charles whispered back. The music swelled, and Maria appeared with Mrs. Fadila walking beside her. Maria had asked the elderly woman to accompany her down the aisle, instead of having her walked away by a man, a choice that honored the woman who had been like a mother to both her and Isabella. Maria wore the ivory dress with confidence and grace, her dark hair arranged in an elegant updo, with small white flowers woven throughout, and she carried a bouquet of roses and baby's breath. But it wasn't just her beauty that moved Charles to tears. It was the expression on her face. Maria was radiant with joy, her smile so bright it seemed to illuminate the entire gathering. When she reached the altar, Mrs. Fadila placed Maria's hand in Charles's with the solemnity of someone who had watched love triumph over adversity. "Take good care of each other," Mrs. Fadila whispered to both of them. "With our lives," they replied in unison. Father Miguel Santos, Maria's cousin who had flown in from Texas, began the ceremony with a prayer in both English and Spanish, acknowledging the multicultural nature of their gathering. Mrs. Fadila followed with a traditional Arabic blessing that brought tears to many eyes. "Dearly beloved," Father Miguel began, "we gather today to witness the union of Charles Wellington and Maria Santos, two souls who found each other in the most unexpected circumstances and discovered that love can transform even the darkest moments into something beautiful." And as they exchanged vows, Charles spoke first. "Maria, when I met you, I thought I was a successful man. I had money, power, and everything I thought mattered. But you and Isabella showed me what true wealth looks like. You taught me that success isn't measured in dollars, but in the love we give and receive. You saved my life, not just that night at the gala, but every day since. You've made me a better man, and I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the trust you've placed in me." Maria's voice was clear and strong as she replied, "Charles, when I was young, my mother told me that sometimes angels come disguised as ordinary people, and we don't recognize them until they reveal their true nature. You came into our lives wearing the disguise of arrogance and privilege, but underneath, Isabella and I found a man with a capacity for love that amazed us. You've shown us what it means to be protected, cherished, and valued. Thank you for becoming the father Isabella always deserved and the partner I never dared to dream of." Damn! When Father Miguel asked for the rings, Isabella stepped forward with the ring-bearer's pillow, beaming with pride at her important role. As Charles and Maria exchanged the simple platinum bands they had chosen together, Mrs. Fadila dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "Do you, Charles Wellington, take Maria Santos to be your wife, to love and cherish her, to support and protect her and her daughter for richer and poorer, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Charles said firmly, his voice carrying across the gathering. "Do you, Maria Santos, take Charles Wellington to be your husband, to love and cherish him, to support and encourage him for richer and poorer, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Maria replied, her voice full of joy. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Charles, you may kiss your bride." As Charles and Maria kissed, the gathering erupted in cheers and applause. Isabella jumped up and down, clapping her hands and shouting, "They're married! They're married!" Father Miguel raised his hand for quiet and said, "Charles and Maria have asked me to perform one more ceremony today." He gestured for Isabella to join them at the altar. While the legal adoption process continues through the courts, they wanted to make a public promise today. Charles knelt down to Isabella's level while Maria placed her hand on their daughter's shoulder. "Isabella Santos," Father Miguel continued, "Charles Wellington promises before God and all these witnesses to love you as his own daughter, to guide you, protect you, and support your dreams for as long as he lives. Do you accept Charles as your father?" "I do," Isabella exclaimed, throwing her arms around Charles's neck. "Then, by the power of love, and witnessed by all here present, I declare you to be a family, bound not just by law, but by love." As the newly formed family embraced, there wasn't a dry eye among the guests. Mrs. Fadila was openly weeping with joy, Detective Carter was wiping his eyes with his handkerchief, and Dr. Walsh was taking pictures while tears streamed down her face. The reception was held in the park's nearby pavilion, decorated with white roses and twinkling lights. Charles had wanted to hire the most expensive caterers in Manhattan, but Maria had insisted on having the meal prepared by their neighborhood's best cooks, Mrs. Fadila's friends from the Queen's immigrant community who considered cooking for the wedding an honor and a joy. During dinner, Detective Carter stood to offer a toast. 11 months ago, I responded to what seemed like a terrorist attack at a Manhattan charity gala. What I found instead was a little girl whose courage saved hundreds of lives and a family being born from the most unlikely circumstances. Charles, Maria, Isabella, you've shown all of us that love really can triumph over hatred, that good can come from evil, and that families are made by choice, not just by blood. Mrs. Fadila followed with her own toast, delivered in accented but clear English. In my country, we say that Allah writes our stories in ways we cannot understand until the end. This family is proof that the most beautiful things can grow from the darkest soil. Mabruk, congratulations to the most beautiful family I know. As the evening progressed, Charles found himself overwhelmed by the joy and warmth surrounding them. This celebration bore no resemblance to the cold, formal events he had once considered sophisticated. Children ran between the tables, elderly guests shared stories and laughter, and the music ranged from classical to Latin to Arabic folk songs. "Daddy," Isabella said, climbing onto his lap as the band played a soft waltz, "are you happy?" "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Charles replied, holding his daughter close while watching his wife dance with Detective Carter. Mrs. Fadila says that when people find their real family, their hearts grow so big with love that there's room for everyone, Isabella said thoughtfully. "She's absolutely right," Charles agreed. "My heart feels huge right now." 6 months after the wedding, Charles Wellington Santos stood in the same courthouse where Marcus Reed would have been tried, holding Isabella's hand as the judge made the adoption official. Maria stood beside them, her hand resting on her growing belly. They were expecting their second child in February. "Mr. Wellington Santos," Judge Patricia Hayes said with a warm smile, "do you promise to love and care for Isabella as your own daughter, providing for her needs and supporting her dreams?" "I do, Your Honor," Charles replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Isabella," the judge addressed the 7-year-old directly, "do you want Mr. Wellington Santos to be your legal father?" "Yes, please," Isabella replied clearly. "He's already my real daddy. We just wanted to make it official." Judge Hayes smiled. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of New York, I hereby approve this adoption. Isabella Wellington Santos, you are now legally the daughter of Charles and Maria Wellington Santos." Isabella cheered and hugged both her parents while the small gathering of friends applauded. Mrs. Fadila wiped away tears, Detective Carter grinned widely, and Dr. Walsh captured every moment on camera. Later that evening, as they celebrated with dinner at their favorite Lebanese restaurant in Queens, Charles reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. 18 months ago, he had been a lonely, arrogant man who measured worth in dollars and power. Now he was surrounded by love, part of a family that grew stronger every day and richer than he had ever imagined possible. "Daddy," Isabella said as they walked home through their neighborhood, "Mrs. Fadila says our family is proof that miracles can happen when people choose love instead of fear." "Mrs. Fadila is absolutely right, my brave girl," Charles replied, lifting Isabella onto his shoulders while Maria walked beside them, her hand in his. As they reached their home, they had moved to a larger apartment in the same building so Isabella could stay in her school and near Mrs. Fadila. Charles looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. A year and a half ago, he had attempted to humiliate a woman and her child for his own entertainment. That act of cruelty had set in motion a series of events that saved hundreds of lives, exposed a murderous betrayal, and ultimately led to the greatest love of his life. "What are you thinking about?" Maria asked softly. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am that a 6-year-old girl was brave enough to speak truth to power and wise enough to forgive a foolish man who didn't deserve her grace." "We all deserved love, Charles," Maria replied. "It just took us a while to find each other." As they climbed the stairs to their apartment, with Isabella chattering about her plans for her baby sister or brother, Charles realized that Mrs. Fadila had been right all along. God had indeed written their story in ways none of them could have understood at the beginning. What had started as the darkest night of his life had become the foundation of the most beautiful family he could have imagined. Their love story would indeed inspire others, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary families are formed not by blood or circumstance, but by the simple decision to love completely and without reservation. And somewhere in Queens, Mrs. Fadila smiled as she prepared lessons for the next generation of children who would learn that courage, compassion, and love could overcome any obstacle.